My next guest is less than average. He is a former Division I athlete. He is educated in psychology and counseling. He hosts a profound podcast show that emphasizes mental health. But what's most intriguing about him is that he's an internationally known stand-up comedian. You are not going to want to miss this interview as we go on a journey and be inspired by a man whose mindset is limitless right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm Mindset Coach Lorraine Lindsay, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Welcome back to another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. I am your host, Coach Lorraine Lindsay, and you can find me at CoachLorraineLindsay.com, whether it's on social media or go to my website, which is www.CoachLorraineLindsay.com. Before I introduce my guest on today's show, please don't forget to hit the subscription button. Let us hear from you. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know what content you want to hear from us. And again, I thank you so much for all the continued support. So I want to get right into it because I'm super excited. It's the first time on the show here, and we're going to tap in. He is multifaceted. He has a lot going on for himself, and I want to get in and pick his brain as much as I can. My guest on today's show is Mr. Leo Flowers. Hey, Leo.
What's going on?
What's going on? Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to do a little intro, a little bit about Mr. Flowers for those who don't know who Mr. Flowers is yet. He is a Chicago native, former Division I college athlete with a master's in counseling and psychology. Leo Flowers moved to LA to also add stand-up comedian, actor, and podcaster to his resume, quickly working his way into major comedian clubs and colleges across the country. His delivery has been described as smooth and deliberate. No two shows are alike. He's always attacking the issues of the day and revealing personal antidotes. Infusing stand-up with storytelling, Flowers captivates audiences of all demographics. He is not limited to his comedy. He is also the podcast host for a show called Before You Kill Yourself. He is, again, master's in counseling and psychology and is a stand-up comedian, but he knows exactly why he's depressed, which is actually pretty deep, and we're going to talk about that. If you watch his podcast, you will join him when he interviews other mental health experts, comedians, and best-selling book authors as they destigmatize mental health and teach you how to thrive. What goes along with that repertoire is the fact that he's also a certified life coach who coaches individuals who are to help them thrive and to be prosperous and successful in their career and finances. Again, if you want to get a hold of you, first of all, go to leoflowers.com. Look to laugh, look to be inspired, and look not to take your life.
That's right. That was beautiful. I feel like it's too long. I should have condensed that right there.
How could it be too long when you're just doing everything and so much more? Like I said, you're a limitless person. And I actually met you. I want to talk a little bit about how I met you. I love comedy. It is my favorite thing, good or bad. I will stop at if I'm in a town and I have some time off, I will look for a local comedy place and I will go. And it doesn't matter what day of the week or whether or not they're professionals or amateurs. First of all, I think it takes a lot of courage to get up and to make other people laugh. And then there's been times where it's like I'm gritting my teeth, but it also makes me chuckle at the same time because I think that laughter is such a good thing for the soul. So
it's a great thing for the soul. I mean, my mom, bless her heart, loves to send me like the worst news of the day.
Okay.
Like, bus crash in Sri Lanka, bombing in Budapest, all these things. And at the end, she always ends it with, but besides that, everything else is okay. And that's just how she's always delivered news to me. And I kind of grew up with that mindset of like, no matter what you're going through, no matter how bad you think things are, no matter what you think about your partner, they don't take out the trash or they ate your last, ice cream or whatever. It's like, regardless of whatever your complaints are, everything else is okay.
Yeah. That's what I found intriguing actually about your show. That's what compelled me when I went. I was in San Diego and there were some people on different corners handing out pamphlets for comedy. And I think it's was it the Comedy Club or
Oh
Laugh
yeah,
Factory?
yeah.
It was one of the two.
Madhouse.
The Madhouse is what it was.
Yes.
I knew it was one of them. And, I'm like, let's just go. Let's just go check it out. And you were the headliner for the evening. And I'm watching you, and you're obviously hilarious. But then you were saying these kind of little things that were profound and thought-provoking. And that, I said, I'm going to ask him. I'm telling my partner, I'm going to ask him to come on my podcast. And he's like, he's not going to come on your podcast. And I'm like, I'm going to ask him anyway. He can just tell me no. And he's like, do it. And I never thought that you'd be sitting here, but there was something about the way in which you delivered your comedy, but then your message as well, that was very intriguing for me. So tell us a little bit about your journey. I mean, you were a Division I athlete.
Right.
Educated master's degree, and not just I'm going to go bachelor's and call it a day. You went and got your master's in counseling psychology, but then you somehow became this international comedian. I mean, you've been on many shows, and we'll talk about that, but tell us about how that all came to be.
Fundamentally, it's about knowing what the theme of your life is. Like what's, my boy Hassan Minhaj calls it your driver. Okay. Everybody has a driver, a thing that just gets them out of bed in the morning. And for me, it's about making people's lives better. So it doesn't matter what job I have or where I'm at in the world. It doesn't matter if I'm a cashier at Walmart, if I'm doing stand-up, if I'm personal training, if I'm life coaching, if it's through my podcast. I can make people's lives better from anywhere. Even if I'm in a car with my Uber driver, right? Just in the conversation that we have, in that 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, there's an opportunity to make someone else's life better, or for them to make my life better. I can learn things from them. So to me, there's no such thing as waiting around or wasted time. If you felt like you wasted time, then that's on you, right? To me, there's always an opportunity to engage, to grow, to learn, to create, to something. There's something there at all times.
I love that. What you said just resonated with me because, and I've told this story before, it's knowing who you are at the core, right? That's what I heard you say. And then you can do anything with that in any facet. And I don't think a lot of people really get that. And that really resonated for me because I was going to school to be a paramedic. I was doing my EMT thing. And then I went into nursing school because at the core, I had this desire to want to help and heal. And I took that literally as having to do that through medicine. And through a course of things and scenarios, it just did not pan out. And it was a very depressing, dark time because I thought that was the only avenue in which I could do it. And I got this, message. I've always felt like God has a way of speaking through people at times for me. And that the message was that just because you have a gift, you don't have to do it literally. That you can give of that gift in any other way. And so it's kind of what you're saying. Because when I'm reading your resume and your bio, and I'm like, gosh, he's doing all these things. But now that you say that, it explains at the core, you want to make people feel better. And so you can do it so many different ways.
Yeah, you have to decide if you want to be inward driven or outward driven. So people who are outward driven, immediately you know these people because they're going to kind of do what you did at the beginning of this podcast, which is list off all the accomplishments.
Right.
Like that's all my outward stuff, and they're going to talk about, I just did this, I just went here and I saw this and I have this degree and et cetera, et cetera. But people who are inwardly driven, you get a sense of who they are without them telling you what they've done. Right. And there's a difference there. You can feel it. And so for me, it's like when you're inward driven, it just allows you to kind of just settle in and be comfortable wherever you are. There's a story about this guy who, suited and booted. That's just how he no matter if he was going to the grocery store, dressing to the nines, right? And so he's walking down the street and this guy pulls a gun out on him and he's like, get down on your knees. And he's like, not in this suit, and it sounds ridiculous.
Right.
But he had already decided who he was and what his life was about and what he wasn't going to do and what he was going to do. And whether that resulted in him getting shot or not, that's the kind of conviction that he had.
Right.
And I think that sometimes we don't, understand what it really means to be committed to something or have a conviction about something. It could mean the end of your life. But up until then, you are serene. You're living a life of
Yeah.
peace.
But how do you get there? Like, how was it for
Mm.
you to get into a state of mind that is convicted, right? There's this conviction there that this is who I am without compromise. And I know that it requires an incredible amount of vulnerability as well. So
Yes.
how did you get there?
Great question. I kind of felt like it was planted there on some level from
Okay.
my dad. I remember when I was 9 years old, my dad called me. My dad really wasn't around. I was the North Side family, as they say.
Mm,
I'm from Chicago, and my dad had a whole other family on the South Side.
mm.
So, but he called me on my birthday, and he said, "How do you feel, son?" I was like, "I feel the same. Just a year older." He's like, "No, no, no. Every year, think about how you've gotten better on your birthday. You look back at the past year
That's
and
good.
focus on how you." And to this day, I think about that. Every year on my birthday, I sit down and I go through my calendar. I go through the external stuff. I do look at the accomplishments and where
Hmm.
I've been and what my experiences have been. And then I also look at the internal stuff.
Right.
From the journaling to the meditation to the, just being able to manage emotions and all those different things. And so, how did I get better internally? How did I get better externally? And then just being at peace with that and then deciding how I want the next year to look and how I want to build on that.
It's interesting that you say, because you mentioned that this was a father who wasn't always readily available to you. There was this story behind you or the other family or what have you. But yet you could extract that lesson. You could find that thing that was able to plant a seed in you. Whereas for other people, if that were their story, the focus wouldn't be on that annual conversation. It would be more emphasis on the 364 days prior to, so to speak. So how did you tap into being able to find that as a treasure for you?
So both, right? Even
Okay.
as you're saying, I could feel my cheeks tingling and
Mm,
and like there's like grief and sadness that's seeping in. And so the way I've come to balance it is, yes, on one hand, I've taken from my father this idea of being better. On the other hand, I also recognize the anger and rage and
mm.
sadness and grief of him not being there. So I have to honor both sides. And so on that grief side, on his birthday every year, I sit down and I write him a letter.
Wow.
And what's powerful is I just freestyle write. I don't think about it. I just whatever's there comes
Just
out.
coming to you.
And what I've noticed is every year there's always three parts to that letter. The first part is pure anger, rage, it's just pure vitriol, right? And then I get to the second part, there's like sadness and grief and despair and just all the melancholic depressive
Right.
feelings that come with that. And then in the third part, peace, serenity, acceptance, love, gratitude. And I recognize that I have to go through
Through the
those
motions. Is that intentional
motions.
when you write that letter? Do you set
No,
the intention?
no. It's just like if I were to just start writing a letter to my dad right now, I'd be like, I would just
Be
be
going
going
off at
in.
first, yeah.
I mean, it's just so at the surface. But if I keep writing, you get to that place of, and so what that taught me is, even in my relationships, right? Where I used to be that guy where, like, if my girl was upset about something and
Mhm.
yelling, I'd be like, man, I don't need to hear this. And I'd leave and walk out or whatever. And
Shut
then I
down.
realized if I can sit with her emotions and hold space for her, eventually she's going to get to that sadness and despair. And then she's going to get to that peace and serenity. But I have to be able to hold that space for
And
her and
you
show her how
that's
to channel
that's so
that.
deep and it's so true, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's actually very inspirational for people who are watching, because I think that a lot of people will be able to relate, self included, of having those anger issues and those frustrations and then going into the sorrows and the sad. And you go from being angry to feeling sorry for yourself and then the compassion, but it's being able to get yourself through the process. So for people out there, it's like, listen, if you've got someone you're feeling these kind of ways for, write the letter, but write it to the end. Let every emotion go through, because it's taught you so much. Now, your podcast. I'm going to segue into the podcast. The show is, which is it's a hardcore title, right? Before You Kill Yourself. That's your podcast. And you said here in your bio that I read, you're someone who knows depression.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that part of that childhood trauma, the parent wounds and things like that were contributors to your depression? And how were you able to not only seemingly, right, manage and cope with it, but also create a platform which you address it very directly? We just recently lost someone else, again, I mean, in the news. I mean, people lose their lives every day to suicide. I lost a parent to suicide. At Twitch, we were talking about that before getting on the show, rest in peace. Just seeing that people out there are struggling and maybe they're not writing the letters they need to write and getting through those emotional things. So why create this platform, and what did it do and mean for you, and how did you overcome, or how do you work through overcoming?
Oh yeah, because I definitely have not overcome
Right.
it. It's
That's
still
why I said that.
a
Yeah.
managing thing, and some people do overcome it. It's like a period in their life, and then some people where it's like a more acute thing that they experience it, and some people have more of a chronic thing where it's just a part of who they are. And for myself, I think it was first recognizing that it's a part of who I am, and a lot of the suffering was thinking it was outside of me, and how do I get rid of this thing?
Right.
And then once you accept that it's a part of who you are, then it becomes about how do I manage it, right? Okay, you're here, you're staying. It's almost like that roommate that's not going to leave. And so you're like, all right, if you're going to be here forever, then we have to set some boundaries and some ground rules, and we have to learn about each other also,
There's this great book I read by Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul.
Oh, beautiful book.
And one of the chapters is on the roommate. And when I read that book, is because I too, I mean, I have a family history of depression. I had a parent end their life, and then another parent who tried many times in my childhood after that had happened. And so it was just something that was so much in my face that I didn't realize how much of a learned behavior it became. And so going through bouts and being angry about a parent leaving that way, and then struggling with my own depression and all that turmoil. But when I read that book, The Untethered Soul, and that roommate, and exactly what you're saying, setting those boundaries and creating, really listening to the voice and hearing what it's saying. I see people all the time walking down the street with mental health issues, and they're outside talking out loud to themselves. People look at them like they're crazy, and it's like, no, they're just saying out loud what you're saying inside your own head, So I wanted you to continue. I didn't mean to interrupt, but you were talking about the roommate and the setting the boundaries. How do you get to a point where you're like, okay, let's have that conversation? And when you hit those moments, like you said, it's something that you kind of have to constantly manage, self included. That how do you create those boundaries and tap into it?
Well, one of the things I first had to do is had to understand it. It's like any other relationship, right? I mean, there's so many books about love and marriage and relationships, and 5 things a woman wants, and 5 ways to please her, and 3. It's like, yeah, that might work for the person who wrote the book,
right?
But my girl seems to be operating under a different operating system, right? And so to take that time to say, all right, suicide. Like Winston Churchill called his depression the black dog. So he kind of made friends with it. And there's a lot of therapy that talks about animating your whatever that depression, or the shadow side, as Carl Jung likes to call it, right? And so once you can do that, and you say, okay, help me understand you, right? You're here for a reason, and I want to understand what's feeding you. Like, where is it coming from? I know that poor sleep can feed it, right? Erratic sleep can feed it. Certain foods, like I've had to cut out caffeine and sugars and processed foods. All those different things can feed it. What am I watching and listening to? Right, that can feed it. And so what I found is, being young and being an athlete, I was so caught up in being excited for things. And I realized that, we talk so much about depression, but on the flip side is excitability.
Right.
I find that if I get too excited about things, that can throw me off, right? In the morning, I do this Neuro Tracker. It's like it's a brain game that I
Okay.
play, and it's like 10 tennis balls that bounce around. 4 light up, and you have to follow the 4 tennis balls that lit up,
Okay.
and then pick them out once they all stop and figure out where your 4 tennis balls are. And what I found is I have 2 responses. One is I'll get really excited because I found them, and then I won't focus for the next round, and I won't see what the next 4 tennis
very
balls are.
interesting.
And then, or I'll get depressed because I didn't get any of the balls, and then I won't pay attention again. So I find that being neutral, nobody talks about, it's not just about being calm, but remaining neutral or objective or stable.
Absolutely.
And because we live in such a rah-rah society, and we think that that's great, but I have a buddy who's a cop, and he said you'd be surprised at how many car accidents happen because people were excited.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They get a phone call, you got a pay raise. We're having a baby. Happy birthday.
Right.
And they go, woo! And then they run through a stoplight and they get hit. And so it's about managing your emotions, because either one can tip the scale
God,
for
that's
you.
so good, because here, the culture we're in now, and especially being a life coach, you're a life coach as well. And one of the things that I get a lot is people are always asking, well, how do I be happy? How do I be happy? And my son, who's really a thought-provoking young man, he's 25 years old, and he sends me a lot of, he loves psychology as well. And he sent me this clip recently on anti-fragility. And it was so profound and so intriguing. I said, I'm going to have to talk about this, because there's such this emphasis on these positive mantras and always being in a peak state and always being happy. And, it's just unrealistic. And what I have learned, same as you in my personal journey, is that understanding that the balance of both things are important. So my sadness and my sorrow serves me in my joy, and my joy serves the sorrow, because it gives me an ability to accept and appreciate both. And so again, finding that neutral ground, saying, okay, this is great what has happened, and to be able to be celebratory about it and celebrate it, but not to a point where when it falls off, then I'm in I fall into this deep depression. And you're seeing that a lot with these young people that are calling themselves influencers, respectfully, on social media platforms, where they're getting this surge or these viral videos. I mean, I had a video go viral, and everyone's like, how do you feel? How do you feel? And I'm like, well, it's just, I'm appreciative. I'm glad people are watching it. I hope it gives some traction to what I'm trying to, with the message I'm trying to convey, but I can't live off of or try to relive that, 9 million or 8 million people that are watching, because I will lose my mind trying to chase after that.
Right. Yeah. Because initially you were trying to just get your message out,
Right.
and now you're chasing the likes and the numbers, and that requires a whole different dynamic, and that becomes addictive, right?
Right.
Where what we find is moderation. Nobody wants to talk about moderation or saying, "Oh, that was enough. That was good enough." Everything has to be great or awesome and all smiles, and so that's what you see, like with Twitch, is like, every video he posted was so positive,
Right.
and he's dancing and look at how great I am, and it's like, that can't be you 24/7.
Right. Clearly.
Right?
We're seeing that.
Absolutely.
And it's shocking, and it's something that's unfortunate, but we need to wake up and see that for all of us, Even for myself, I try to be as mindful. I try to put positive message. I don't want to be the person with the negative news and the woe is me. So I try to be positive, but also be mindful that what is the perception? Not that I can really control it entirely, but just say, let me be transparent. Let me be a normal person. So when I talk and I motivate, it's like, no, but here's the story, here's the struggle, along with that positive conversation.
And that's why I love to read biographies. I don't like self-help books, because what a self-help book typically does is it cherry picks, right? Here are the 10 things that Benjamin Franklin did and why he was a success.
Right.
But it doesn't tell you about his struggle and his mindset and what went into that and why he thought like that. Like, I listened to George Washington's bio, which is like 25 hours, right? But from that, what was beautiful, it was that there was a point where he didn't want to be president again. He was like, I don't want to do this. But he recognized he had to do it because there was no one else that could fill the shoes at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? He was like, if I don't do this, then everything crumbles. I'm the only guy right now that can do this. And so that's why he did it. And it was also why he didn't have kids, is because he felt like the country, the citizens
Oh,
of
I
this
didn't know
country
George Washington didn't have any children.
didn't have any children.
Man, you just gave me a little history. I did not know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, and so his story was wild, and even why he picked his wife, like even before he got married, he was choosing between Martha, his wife, and this girl is like hot, Italian, a little spicy mama, and he was like, man, I want the hot Italian, but I don't see longevity with her. He's like, I'm bored with Martha, but I can go the distance with Martha.
Interesting.
So you get into the mindset of how they made the decisions and not just the outcome of the decisions. And that's more informative to me of how did they get, it's like in school, show your work. And in a lot of self-help books, they don't really, I need to know, like, I read Warren Buffett's bio also, right?
Okay.
And if you read any book that mentions Warren Buffett or any podcast, they always talk about how he became wealthy because of compound interest.
Right.
When you read his book, you realize he became wealthy because of partnerships.
Interesting.
He only invested in companies that he could partner with. Yes, he bought some stock in some companies,
right.
but his real wealth was in, I'm going to put money into your company and then I'm going to buy you out and then I'm going to sell it once.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you get the details of a person.
I think that's so important. And I think that that's something that you have to take the initiative to say, this is a place that I want to be in my life, whatever that may be, but becoming informed on the steps that it takes, because people like to focus on people just showing up as though they just popped out of nowhere, right? And it's like, no, there's setbacks and there's moments of wanting to give up. Then there's times that you're doing it when you don't want to do it, and you're compelling why behind it, like you said earlier on. You don't do all the things that you do because you want to have this ego construct of, this is my resume. It sounds great. It's beautiful. It's very impressive. But you have this inward thing that keeps you going past sometimes the desire to keep going. So what does that mean to you? Like, how did you, because obviously you're being informed, you're learning so much. This is fascinating. You actually now I want to start tapping into some bios and start reading bios, because you're absolutely right. But what is it for you? Okay, why comedy? Let me just go right there. Why comedy? You obviously you're very articulate, not that comedians are not. But the psychology and the counseling and the life coaching, the podcast, and then comedy. It's kind of like this interesting thing that goes with it. Why that?
I love studying evolutionary psychology and like hunter-gatherer days. And one of the things that I love is at the end of a day, you get to sit around that campfire and, there was a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody would be leaned in and to hear his stories of the day, or, where he's been and what he's been through, or whatever. Maybe he's making it up, old wise tales and stuff. And growing up, that was something that I just naturally did.
Okay.
I was always telling stories. I was always making up stuff that happened over the weekend or stuff my friends did or whatever. And in the locker room, everybody else was cracking jokes and I was telling stories, and people would lean in and be like, what? I can't believe that, And there's just something unifying about when somebody says once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
There's something soothing. There's something that we all like. There's a Moth podcast. There, books. Stories transcend time. It transcends cultures. I had an Uber driver who he was from Nigeria, and I get in and he's listening to Willie Nelson, right?
Okay.
Country music.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did he put this on for me? Like, you never like sometimes you get in an Uber and you feel like they try to
cater
guess
the music to you. Yeah. Totally.
I was like, come on, man. I ain't listening to that right now. And so I get in and I was like, what's up with this Willie Nelson? He said, oh, Willie Nelson is big in Nigeria. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, because he tells stories. He goes, rap is too fast and we don't understand all the different lingos.
Right,
and stuff.
the slang.
But storytelling is just love, loss, fear, family. Those are things that
Yeah.
transcend all cultures. So coming back to comedy, I was like, wow, this is a way to make the world better by telling my story. I could tell you my opinion on politics. I could tell you my opinion on guns, like don't have guns or guns are bad. Or I could tell you a story about the 3 times I've had guns pulled on me.
Right.
And then I trust you to take away from that whatever you want. I'm not
Right.
telling you to go left or right. I'm saying here's what happened and why, and here was
That's
the
actually
outcome.
very powerful.
Yeah.
And you doing that and speaking and being a storyteller, right? You could do that through motivational speaking. You could be a speaker and do that. But why comedy?
Because laughter sticks.
Yeah.
It's emotional. And I think that a lot of times when we think about stand-up comedy, we just think about the laughter part. But the other part is building tension.
Mhm.
You're not going to laugh unless I build tension. And the way I build tension is by rooting the comedy in something that's real and authentic. So I get to be both real and authentic, right? And I get to make you laugh. And so these are 2 things that I very much value, right? Laughter, storytelling, people gathering around, and then being like, I never thought about it like that, or thank you for sharing that story, or I thought I was the only one that,
Mhm.
experienced that, or my mom does that too, those
What's
moments.
interesting about your comedy, since I have been blessed to watch you do your stand up, um, is it seems very you don't seem like you're grasping for straws when you speak. It seems that you are very mindful and you have this unique, it's like funny, but there's like compassion. Like I'll give you an example. I don't know if you remember, but we were like literally in the front row and he was passed out. Not because you were not funny. He was knocked out. Okay. And I'm like dying inside. I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going to get picked on for sure. And he had had a very long, stressful day and he just needed to go out and just get a laugh. Right. And so we had a few cocktails. But when he, has a couple drinks in him and some medical stuff, it just makes him very tired. But he's really, truly there enjoying himself. And so I'm mortified. And you were I remember like you said something and it was to him and he kind of woke up and we all started laughing. But you were so mindful and you were careful on how you did the joke. It was still funny, but I don't know. I thought it was really interesting. And then I actually had talked to you, I don't know if you remember, but after the show, and you said, no, because there are people, and you shared a story about someone who fell asleep before and there was something, medical or something like that. And so you had a responsibility to how you approach it, even though you still make it funny. And some comedians, especially when they're starting off, they just grasp for straws. So is that something that's very important for you in your style of comedy, or is it just something that's just innate?
It's something that I've learned
Okay.
over time. I think having compassion is and empathy is innate, but it's also something that I had to hone by watching other comedians handle
Gotcha.
it. And I just remember like early on in my career, there was a guy who was asleep up front, and just head in his arms, and his wife was with him. And I was like, man, this dude's asleep already. And the wife was like, he just got back from 8 months of being on a naval ship.
Wow.
And they had like 6 kids or something. And this is his first night, out. And so I was like, oh, okay. And, so you very early learn that it's not about you. Right? When the way somebody responds, the way somebody reacts is 9 times out of 10 not about you. I had another guy at a show. I was doing it, and the guy yelled out 2 minutes, and I was like, "What?" And he's like, 2 minutes. I was like, "What is that about?" And he goes, "You've been on stage 2 minutes, and you haven't made me laugh."
Oh,
Right? And
oh my God.
I go, and luckily, Leo Flowers had like meditated for like 30 minutes that day. And I had like 30 friends show up, and they were, so
So you had your tribe.
so I had my tribe with
Yeah.
me, and so I said, "Are you having a bad day?" And he's
Ooh.
like, and you can see his shoulders drop. He goes,
Mhm.
"I am having a bad day." He goes, "I just lost my job, and I think me and my wife are gonna divorce."
Oh, wow.
He shared all that immediately,
Wow.
And I was like, can we get a collective awe for this brother?
Right.
And then afterwards, he was like, man, I'm so sorry about that. So, these little lessons stick with me.
That's so good.
And
Yeah.
so when I see somebody asleep or people talking or, I'm just like, if you want to can you go outside? Because I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you got some bad news.
Right.
And
then you just got people who are just
yeah,
blatantly disrespectful.
absolutely. I mean, I definitely had people kicked out and, you can tell like they want the show to be about them
Right.
and they're drunk and I would go, they got to go. But if I'm going to give you the opportunity to, share your side of the
Right.
story. I don't need the jokes really fast. Because
you're witty though, you can just
absolutely,
yeah,
and sometimes it's and you can, and then the audience trusts you more if you handle that. Because I've seen it where this comic gets on stage, he's the headliner, right?
Okay,
gets on stage and immediately starts yelling at this guy up front for talking. Right, and it screams.
But that's so bad; it sets the tone. It
right,
changes everything.
Because
yeah,
his act was kind of like this corny, like kids show kind of thing, right? You can't go from berating somebody to like, dun, 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 so
what's happening here? Yeah.
So for the whole hour, he just bombed. Basically, the audience was like, "You're not authentic."
Right.
So to me, that's more valuable.
That's so true, right? That first impressions are lasting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what's next for you then? I mean, what is the end all goal for you, or is there one? I mean, like I said, you're doing many, many different things. How do you keep focus?
Oh, I don't keep it. I lose it often.
That's so raw. That's so
true. But I have these moments of daily routine is so important. If you go to leoflowers.com and you put your email in there, you'll get something from me called the Daily Germs, JERMS, where I journal, exercise, read, meditate, self-talk.
I love that.
And so in these moments where I start to feel untethered or ungrounded, I'll be like, hold up, did I do my germs today? Did I journal? Did I exercise? I mean, there's another comic on the show, I forget his name, I don't want to butcher it, but he was just saying, because he flew in from New York.
Okay.
And he's like, man, that first night I felt off. And he's like, I realized, because I was flying and traveling, I didn't get a chance to work out, And so I think we underestimate how much of our mood and our mindset is linked to movement.
Absolutely.
Right? And to actually, so there's too much of an emphasis on like working out and exercising and P90X. It's like, but just being active.
Right.
Just doing stuff around the house, walking to the grocery store instead of driving.
It's doing a little something for self.
Just, that's it.
And being able to just like tap in.
Yeah.
And I feel like even for me, not to interrupt you, but even for me, you're exactly right. There's a routine, and there's a discipline, there's a habit that I have that allows me to check in. It allows me to check in with what I've got going on emotionally, to set the tone for my day. Also know that doesn't have to, it's not necessarily going to stick, and that there are going to be things that can offset that day and emotionally can change me. But just being able to check in and knowing that I have a check-in routine, that if I don't get into my check-in routine, exactly like what you just said, it's like, wait a minute, did I do my germs today? And that's the same thing. Like sometimes I'm like, my day is off.
Yeah.
And then because I have this set thing that I normally do, I can always say, oh, wait, I didn't do my thing, and even if it's just one thing of those things that I can get into to kind of reset a little bit, it's just great that I have those tools. You
need to have, and that goes back to being internally driven,
right.
And that's kind of the basis for the title of my podcast, Before You Kill Yourself, of like, did you check these boxes off?
I love that.
Because a lot of times, we want to end our lives, and because we're thinking about all the things in our lives that are out of control, that we're hopeless or helpless to, and have no influence over, and we forget about the things that are still within our reach, within our grasp. Nelson Mandela. I haven't read his bio, but I read like parts of his story, and I was always fascinated with, how did someone so young who went to prison survive mentally, emotionally? 30, 40 years?
Yeah.
I mean, he was in there for a minute. And that's where I got the Daily Germs from. because he said every day he would journal, he would exercise, he would read, he would pray, and he would try to socialize if he could. Sometimes he was in isolation, and he said journaling to the point where the guards would take away his paper and pen as punishment.
Wow.
And so he would write on the walls. And if he couldn't write on the walls, he would write in the dirt. But every day he found a way to write, to scribe,
Wow.
to get his thoughts and ideas down. And I was like, man, if that got him through that,
Right.
and not only got him through, he thrived on the other side. It's not like he didn't come out of there all feeble and weak, and you didn't feel like he felt just as powerful
Right.
when he walked out as when he went in.
Right.
And so I go, there's something there about having the thing that is valuable to you no matter what is happening
it
out
goes
here.
back, circling back to what you said from the beginning. It's being inward as opposed to being external. Your title, the Before You Kill Yourself, how did you and why did you come up with that as a title for your podcast?
Crazy story. I was on a flight coming back from Pakistan,
Okay.
doing some shows over there with some other comedians, and I just been tossing names around. I was thinking about doing a podcast on suicide prevention because in grad school I did my my thesis on black male suicides.
Okay.
And I was like, and then I found out Rashaan Salama, who was a running back for the Chicago Bears, had ended his life. And my buddy, when I talked to him, who knew him, said he didn't know how to take care of himself. And I was like, man, this dude, running back, Heisman Trophy winner, had all the things that I would have wanted, right? Playing for the Chicago Bears, didn't know how to take care of himself. Like, that was insane to me. And so I'm on this plane and I'm talking to my buddy. I was like, I'm thinking about calling it Before You Kill Yourself. And he's like, ooh, I would listen to that. And then this lady, 3 rows in front of me, jumps up and she goes, you better be careful what you're talking about.
Oh.
People can hear you. She goes, I was in a bathroom years ago with a gun in my head.
Wow.
And I was about to blow my brains out. And then I heard my baby crying.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, I forgot I got to feed the baby. And she's like, that saved my life.
Wow.
And I looked at my boy, I go, well, I'm definitely going to call it Before You Kill Yourself now.
That's confirmation.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? For her, before you kill yourself, go feed the baby.
Yeah.
And so, let's dig into that because that's so deep, right? It's like, all right, you've made this decision that you want to end your life for whatever your reason is that you want to end your life. But what are the things that you didn't do before, right? Is that kind of the premise?
It's kind of like what happens is when we feel flooded, when we're in that dark hole,
Right.
it narrows what we believe our options to be. It's like, man, if it could feel like the only way out,
right,
is death.
And then for some people, they feel like life is better without them. That
Absolutely.
everything around them,
Absolutely.
if they were just to go, it would solve a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
And it's quite the contrary, especially for people that love them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's like, hold on. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying, but can we just check off these things over here that you still haven't done yet and then see how you feel?
Right.
Even with addiction, it's like, okay, before you reach for that next drink because you think you need it because things didn't go, you had a bad day or whatever, it's like, well, just take a shower first, brush your teeth, and then see if you still want to drink, or call a friend, exercise, pray 5 minutes, then see if you want to drink. But I think we have this all or nothing because nobody wants to be told no. And nobody wants to feel like they can never do a thing. So I don't want to preach that it's not so much about don't kill yourself. It's like, hold on, did you hug somebody? Have you been honest about who you are
right.
and what you need and want?
Right.
If your answer is no to those things, then let's see what happens if you do that first. Have you drank water? Like we're so unaware of how fragile our mood and our mind state is.
Absolutely.
All I got to do is when you think about prisoners of war or torture, people think about the brutality, like, oh, they're going to beat you or they're going to do this and that. The first step
is mental.
is mental.
Absolutely.
First thing I'm going to do, deprive you of sleep. That's the first step in any terrorist torture act, is just not let you fall asleep. So I'm looking at how you sleep. And so for me, I realized like I have sleep apnea. And when you look at the stats on sleep apnea is highly correlated with ADHD, depression, suicidality, anxiety, obesity, all these different things. So I said, all right, Leah, hold on, man. Before we pull the plug, let's see what happens when we clean up our sleep first.
Right.
And night and day. It's a night and day difference.
That's so deep, because it's like, I don't think people think on those terms. They don't really, they just know I'm feeling as though I'm suffering. I feel powerless in a thing. It's a powerless feeling, right? Tony Robbins talks about it all the time. He's like, pain is inevitable. People will go through painful things in life, but your suffering is a choice, because the difference is you feel powerless in what's happening. And so we get so caught up, we get so stuck on the stories of why we are powerless and why we are suffering, that sometimes it's just checking in and saying, okay, but am I resting enough? Am I eating enough? Am I, again, I love what you said about, am I sharing enough? Am I finding people that I can trust to say, this is what I'm going through? Am I finding the resources? Let me exhaust everything first before I take a temporary problem and make a permanent decision.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that it's such a fragile topic, and people tread very lightly, understandably so. And there's a lot of responsibility behind it. But it's also something that we need to get behind and talk about more. Because it's like there's shame also. I remember my father took his life, and we didn't talk about mental health and what caused him to go down this rabbit hole and take his life. What we talked about was sweeping it under the rug, and let's just quickly moving on with our lives. A lot of denial and a great deal of shame. You know, I remember as a little girl, a friend of mine, her mother was like, where's your father? Why don't you have a father? You know? And as a little kid, I felt very uncomfortable to lie. So I remember telling her that, my dad was in a car accident. Now, it was true that he had been in a car accident several years ago, but it wasn't why he wasn't around. I just let her assume that was the reason, because I was so ashamed. I didn't know what it meant to just leave. It was almost like he didn't want me. So by me saying he took his life was by me telling someone didn't want me. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And it wasn't something that we talked about, you know? And so things like this podcast that you're doing, I feel like it is, it's such, we need more. We need to talk about this more, because it's happening a lot. And I don't know, you know, I've been doing research, and I really have been tapping in, because it hits close to home. But it's just like, God, it seems like it's such a thing, especially amongst younger people who have their whole lives ahead of them, and they're just taking themselves out. So it's hard. It's tough.
Well, you know, the other part is the lack of education. And in terms of, people don't understand how their physiology works, especially young people, but even older people. I mean, you know, this is why I'm such a huge advocate for, I'm starting to talk more about sex education on stage, because what we would learn from sex education is not just about sex, but about our physiology, about how our brain works, about, you know, the fact that your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's the thinking part, that doesn't really develop in males until they're 25. And that's if they haven't had any head trauma before that. If they've had head trauma, it may never fully develop, right? And so they're in this constant fight or flight mode. And so they're constantly reactive instead of being responsive to things. And so when people don't have an understanding of their physiology, then they internalize what's happening, and they think that, you know, because we have this society that tells you to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, you know, figure it out, you know, and be independent. And so at no place in history has man done something of significance by themselves, right? It's always been in pairs, tribes, groups, a collective. There's countries, companies, right? There's a reason why they form these things, because the more of us that get together, then the more powerful we can become,
Absolutely.
right?
Unity versus division, right? It's
Absolutely.
even the power behind our words. It does one of two things. I always tell people: your words will either unite or divide. What you say to yourself, what you say to others, and exactly that. It's like we have this society that says you have to be independent, especially for women, right? We're like, all us women want to be boss bitches, and we're independent. And I'm guilty of, but realizing no, there's nothing I can do alone.
And neither do you want to do it alone.
Right.
Like, that's
Right,
boring. Like, that's
exactly.
not fun. I don't want to go to Paris or Bali by myself. I don't care how beautiful it is. You're right. Like,
That's
I
so
want to
true.
go with my people.
Yeah. You want to share that with someone.
You want to share
Yeah.
it with people. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of young people, they think that the sharing is through social media. And it's you need that oxytocin that
for
you only
sure.
get through hugs and pets and touch
connection, yes.
and connection. One of the reasons I've gotten arguments with some of my female friends about, why does my husband like sports so much? And
I
why
like
does he
how your
to
female
watch
friends
that?
sound.
Yeah.
Got that falsetto going.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And one of the things that, and even I'm just realizing this, is what I miss from playing football is that touch, that physical affirmation, the pats on the back, the hugs. Like, the other day, my girl wanted a hug. She was like, "Can I just have a hug?" And I was like, and I felt myself recoiling. I was like, why? Like, what'd you do? Because I realized my programming has been, I only get hugs or especially hugs when I've done something. When
You
I
said it.
scored a touchdown.
Programming,
right?
Yeah.
I had to do something that benefits the group or the team in
for
order
you.
to receive.
That's
And I was like, so
interesting.
how dare you just ask, like, did your video go viral? Did you,
Right.
that kind of thing? And so I had to check myself and be like, no, she's asking for a thing that she needs. And we know that hugs release oxytocin, which is the same thing that gets released from painkillers. And so I need the hug too. But I just didn't realize that I
But you
could just
did.
ask for it.
Yeah.
So I recognized I was jealous. I was like, damn, you could just ask for a hug. I didn't know you could do that, But it was a beautiful moment, for both of us, of like, oh, okay, I can appreciate that. But going back to why we love sports is because, as guys, when we watch sports, that's one of the few times where we actually can be emotional. We can be primal. We can yell. We can scream. We can cry. We can, high five and all that. And there's not a lot of room to kind of just be raw and emotional.
Right.
You have to, at work, you have to be stoic. The family got to be stoic and act like everything is.
Do you
not
think
a lot
that
of
your
outlets.
comedy is kind of gives that back to you in a way?
To me,
Yeah.
no. Even in my comedy, there's a bit of there's some restraint. And for me, it's like I have to, that's what swimming is for me. That's what hiking is.
Okay.
That's what talking to various family members mean for me. And what I mean is, there's this book called Lonely, and she described it. I thought this was so perfect, a way to describe being lonely. She said, it's when you're not able to express all the parts of you. So you may find, like, we're on a podcast. So I'm expressing a part of me,
Right.
but this isn't all of
you.
me, right?
Right.
And so when I'm with my nephew, I have a nephew, Mateo Lopez, right? He's 12, right? Now, how I interacted with him when he's 12 versus when he was 4, those brought out different parts of me.
Right.
When I'm talking to my girl or my mom or my boys or almost like different areas.
Well, we're multifaceted,
Yes.
I mean, I worked in the casino business for a very long time, and my job was to go after these really high-end whales, $1 million players. And my job, I always say I'm going to write a book about this one day. It's like, my job was always to get to know the fifth person. And people will say, well, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, there's 5 people to 1. There's who you are with your family. There's who you are with your friends. There's who you are as a lover. There's who you are in your work world. And then there's your fifth person. And my job was to get to know this person. This person doesn't want these people to know who they are. And if I built a relationship with this person, it was hook, line, and sinker every single time. But everybody that I met is there, including self, we're all multifaceted in that way. So I want to close with this. You actually have a show tonight, and I hope I can come and see it. But I want to close with this and ask you this one last question, especially as we tapped in so much into mental health. And ironically, with comedians, you see that a lot of comedians actually suffer quite a bit from depression, with mental health issues. I mean, we saw the great Robin Williams, who literally seemingly had everything that he needed for his life except for that of fulfillment. So, what for you as a comedian, or why I should say, do you think that that's such a thing amongst comedians, especially when their job is to make everyone else laugh?
I think that you see mental health struggles in any profession where you have a combination of things. One is erratic sleep patterns.
Okay.
When you start off as a comedian, you're literally driving from one gig to the next, and a lot of times overnight. And you're using, back in the day it was cocaine, and now, Red Bull or whatever those energy drinks are
Right.
to fuel you. And so you're constantly on this upper downer cycle because you're trying to stay awake to drive from one gig to the next. And then the other part is you're away from your family while you're doing this, while you're alone on the road. So you're not getting oxytocin. You're not, I believe everybody needs a daily dose. You need dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin,
Right.
and endorphins.
Yep.
And oxytocin comes from touch. And so this is why you also have a lot of infidelity amongst comedians who are married and go on the road, because we need touch, whether it's from parents, people, pets, or what have you. And then the third part is where a lot of us know how to like ramp ourselves up. A lot of us have not really learned how to settle ourselves down. And so a lot of times what you'll see is the comedian is using alcohol, or not alcohol, but energy drinks to stay awake, but then using alcohol to put themselves to sleep. So if we know anybody who knows anything about alcohol, it doesn't really allow you to sleep. It just sedates you.
Correct.
Right.
It's ethanol. It has to burn, so
Absolutely.
your body doesn't rest.
Absolutely. So your body's never getting rest. So if you think about the average comedian, it takes them 10 years to make it at the very least. That's 10 years of putting your body through this up or down
programming, right?
Absolutely. And then that becomes and you're starting off young. So you're doing this before your brain once again has formed, and so now the damage is done.
Right.
And now we see it, and then you think about all the driving. Fourth thing is physical pain from just the chronic driving, sciatica, back pain. You put on weight. Those things influence your mood, behavior, things like that. And so now you finally make it, right? Here's the fifth. You finally make it. You haven't built a support network.
Right.
Right? You haven't seen your family. You haven't seen your friends. You're not really rooted or grounded anywhere. So if things go south, where do you go?
Right.
Who's your outlet? Where's home for you? Right? So so we see it with comedians. We see it with people in the medical field.
Athletes, for sure.
Athletes.
Yeah.
Yep. My friend who's a vet, it's like the medical field actually has the highest suicide
I know.
rates.
I worked in the medical field for 10 years as a medic, and definitely saw the depression and things like that. Plus, we were dealing with PTSD that no one talked about. There was an emphasis in the military for that, and understandably, but we never really talked about we're seeing things. I saw things that most people should not see on a regular basis, and that it desensitizes you. It causes all kinds of things. The other thing that you said, which was earlier, was also the highs. You get this super peak, right? And then all of a sudden it can plateau, and not being able to manage that. How do you want to close this? What do you want to say? I mean, because you've said so many beautiful things, and honestly, there's so many different avenues that we could specifically talk about.
Yes.
It's been really a pleasure. I just sitting here, I'm like, I'll just let him just go. But if you were to leave people with anything from the psychological side of you, from the podcast that you do and your comedy, how would you close this? What would you say to the people out there? And then also tell us how we can get in touch with you.
I love it. I love it. A great question. Wow, I've never had that question asked to me before in terms of, like how to close and what to leave people with. The thing that came to mind was, shake it off and then, reach out to somebody. I think about, I've read a lot of books on trauma.
Mm,
And a lot of, I feel like a lot of people are spending a lot of energy trying to figure out the source of their trauma and getting to the why and all that stuff. But the other part is like, but in a moment, like, how do you handle it when it's right now? And
mhm.
all the research shows, when you feel flooded, there has to be a period where you shake it off or walk it off. And it's in Spain, they say "Salvator ambulando," which walking solves everything, or something like that. It is solved by walking. I mean, and we forget about the power of movement in dealing with when we feel flooded or upset or angry. But then also then to find some way of connecting physically
Mm,
with someone, and just and having that courage to ask for a hug. A lot of times when we think about courage, we think about somebody running into a burning building,
right.
or saving somebody, or doing stand-up comedy. But to say, for a man especially, right, to say to somebody, can I just have a hug?
Right.
Right. And I talked about this on stage, where it's easier for a man to try to sleep with a woman for touch than to just say, listen, I enjoy our time together. I don't want to sleep with you. I just really just need a hug.
Mm,
Right? It's easier to ask to, hey, can we do this thing, versus, can you just hold me for
right.
3 minutes?
So what I hear you say is that there's courage and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
It's being able to say, I am overwhelmed, I am flooded, I
Yeah.
feel like checking out,
Yep.
and I need to have the courage to be vulnerable.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leo, for coming.
Thank you for having
It
me.
has been such a pleasure, much more than I could ever imagine when I first asked you to come on this show. And I do appreciate your time, because I know it's precious and you've got a lot going on. Um, if you all want to get a hold of Leo, check out one of his comedy. You can see him on YouTube. You can go to leoflowers.com, and it has his podcast. It has some comedy snippets, and it also has his breakdown of what he does as a life coach. I mean, as you can see here today, he is a wealth of everything from laughter to perspective to mindset. So thank you again for watching. Again, if you like the show, please do not forget to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. And until next time, ciao.